I'm glad you're joining us tonight. It is Tuesday night, episode 265. Pretty cool. I like seeing these little, even markers. 265 is a good round number. It's a good solid number. All right, tonight's topic: who God helps and who He doesn't. I was thinking about this topic mainly because it's the new year, and I have quite a few ideas and things that have been going through my mind, specifically having to do with the new year, my own, goals for the new year, and this idea of, a fresh year, fresh ideas, fresh momentum, things like that have just been rolling through my mind quite a bit, actually. And one of the things I started thinking a lot about was how desperate, if we're just like zooming way, way out and we're thinking about, man in general, whether you believe in God or not, the idea of having a God who would actually help you should seem, at least, to the logical mind, like a good idea. Like that would be a good thing to have. If there was a God, and I'm just saying this, zooming way, way out, if you don't believe in God or you do believe in God. But if there is a God, wouldn't you want to have Him helping you instead of, working against you or ignoring you? You know what I mean? Like there's got to be something in you that says, if there's a God, I would like to have Him on my side, or I'd like to have His help, His assistance. And there's a story I heard recently from a book, actually Pastor Greg Mitchell's most recent book. He shares the story of a pastor named Jonathan Heinberg, who he's pastoring in South Africa now, but when he was he used to pastor in Gallup, New Mexico. And he told this story that apparently they had purchased this like really big trailer, and the idea for this the trailer was a converted into like a giant stage. It was like a really large trailer, and so they got this thing, but every time they use it, apparently they got a really, really good deal on it. Something he was looking for, he found this trailer. They wanted to use it for events, so they could take events out, do outreaches and stuff like that.
I've heard of this trailer.
And so he I wondered if you might actually, I'm sure it's shared otherwise, but he said that every time they used it, they had to rent a semi-truck because of how big it is. And so, which obviously, renting cars in general is not always cheap, but renting a semi, I can't even imagine how expensive that would be. And so he was like, we need to buy a truck. We need to find one. And they just couldn't afford the prices that they were coming across for these trucks because they're so big and so expensive. And so he said one night he was reading an article about some mega church that had like had done some multi-million-dollar expansion on their building, and he was just looking at that, and he stops reading and he looks at his wife and he starts complaining about it. And he goes, how is it that these churches that don't focus on their focus is not people, and their focus is not seeing people saved? How come it just doesn't seem right that they have all this money to just toss into a multi-million-dollar project, and here we can't even afford to buy a truck? And he said, apparently while he was saying this, his phone rings, and a guy that they had worked with at some point got on the phone with him, and he said, hey, are you guys still looking for a truck for your trailer? And he said, yeah, we are. And he said, there's a guy in town who wants to give you a truck. And so he said they worked out the legalities of it. They went through all the paperwork, and this guy gave them a really nice truck that was perfectly fit for their trailer. And so on the one hand, you could be a skeptic, or you could be a non-believer and look at that and say, well, we just write that off. It's just coincidence or whatever. But to people that believe in God, that was not coincidence, and stuff like that happens a lot. I could actually go through a lot of stories I have like that, and situations like that where there was a need, and help came perfectly fit for that need, so basically out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so it just merits a question: who does God help, and who doesn't He help? Who gains God's assistance, as it were, and who are those who God either works against or He ignores? And we see that in the Bible. We see all three of those scenarios in the Bible. And there's a scripture that I thought about when I was, it's an easy scripture really, but Psalms 121, this is an anonymous author. We don't know who wrote it, but he says these words: I lift up my eyes to the hills, from where my help comes from. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. That word help literally means one who gives assistance. And he's saying this with genuine confidence, right? He's writing this, and if you read the rest of that chapter, he says, the Lord will not cause your foot to slip, and he'll provide for. I mean, just the things he's saying. It's a very short chapter, but it's said with this level of confidence. Now, contrast that to something in the book of James. There's actually two scriptures in the book of James. One very interesting one. He's talking about people who ask or who lack wisdom. Let anyone who lacks wisdom ask God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach or without finding fault. And then he says, but those who ask must ask in faith, because anyone who asks doubting should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. And then again in chapter 4, James says it again. And James is actually a beast. I was thinking about these scriptures in general. James was like, he didn't hold back. He says what he's very blunt in his very short letter. But he says in James 4 verse 3, he says, and when you do ask, he's talking about people who pray, when you do ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may squander it on your pleasures. So again, we have this picture of somebody who's confident in God's assistance, and then James talking about the ability of, or the possibility of being able to ask God for things and actually not receive them. So people who are actually looking for God's help and not getting it. Okay, so there are some who genuinely depend on God's help, and there are those who ask for it but don't receive it. So right off the bat, I just want to kind of define what God's assistance looks like, because I've talked to people who, I believe in God. I woke up this morning, I breathe, and I'm, there's the sun came up this morning. God totally helps me. And they genuinely believe that. But is that help? Is that what God's help looks like, especially in the context of Psalms 121?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be addressed in talking about this particular thing is the idea of passive help versus active help. And that there's a difference. God helps everyone. Nobody would be alive if he didn't.
Right.
If you're breathing, it's not because you're righteous. You're breathing because God says breathe. And so it's not a reflection on anything that we are. It's a reflection on who he is. So that, I think, needs to be sort of the foundation for understanding who God helps, is to understand that God does passively help everyone. Nobody is not helped by God. And I think that the reason why that's important is because, like the statement, why is it that people who are not really interested in the things of God, yet it seems like they have these favor, as opposed to people that are living for God and not having that favor, is to understand that God helps everybody, and so it isn't that why is God helping them and not helping me? God is helping everyone. The appearance of God helping others and not helping us is often because of the comparison of things that we see other people have that could very well just be, God's help, his passive help. In other words, it could very, like what you said, because there's a naive, it's funny, Christianity, and it's something that I try very hard to try to help people to understand, is that Christianity, it's not, people who have been raised in Christianity don't seem to get past Sunday school, children's Sunday school. They're raised in school, they're taught these various stories, and they're taught the children's version of these stories, and these concepts though are taken into adulthood, which is why it's so difficult to reach other people, is because non-Christians, they're children, and then they grow up and they become adults. And not everyone, there are lots, that never grow up and they go off into sin and disobedience and wickedness, and they get in trouble, and, they break the law and they end up in prison and things like that. There is that reality. But almost right across the board, when it comes to Christianity is this immaturity. Spiritually speaking, there's this immaturity, and not being able to understand, why God doesn't do certain things for them, but He does it for other people. And little kids see that. How come that family has it? How come all those kids get new bikes and we don't? And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
There's nothing different about that. It's the difference of passive help. Maybe their parents just make way more money. It's not because they love their kids more.
Right.
It's because they have more expendable income, and that's why. And it's not that your parents don't want to get you a bike. They just simply can't afford to have it. And so, but those are adult concepts that children don't understand. And so you have these same kinds of concepts when it comes to believers about God is, how come God is helping these people and I'm more spiritual than they are? It's that same idea is maybe it's just simply because this person is, has better business sense than you do, and they've gone around and, especially in the Bay Area, it's what's the difference between a successful startup and one that's not successful? Venture capital. That's what, and some people are just no good at selling their ideas. It isn't that the money's not there. It's just they're not good at selling their ideas, and venture capitalists will listen and say, it's a great idea, but I don't think you're the one to do it, and so we're not going to give you the money. And so there's ability, human ability. And so it's not, what the point I'm making is it's naive to think that God is helping those people because they have a better, they're not really that interested in God, but they have a belief in God, and God is helping them. And where you are busting your butt and you really believe God and God is not helping you that's very naive. You just simply may be missing things, and it may, what you're looking at may just be God's passive involvement, just simply the fact that God created them with a brain, and they're, they're able to tap into wisdom, that other people are not able to tap into. It's not the active moving of God. So that has to be there, because I think that will deal with a lot of our problem when it comes to God working in our lives, is the reality that, God's passive working is still very powerful. And you may not be able to tap into God's passive working. You may not have the wisdom. You may not have the understanding for things. You may have all the best of intentions, but you just simply don't have the wisdom. So that's one element of it. And the other element now of God's active involvement, and it's something that I talk about a lot, is that just because something good has happened to you doesn't mean God did it. Because that's the passive on the other side. You just happen to be on the advantage side rather than the disadvantage side. And so we're still talking about the passive side, but now to go to the active side, this is a very difficult place for many people, because the active side is the side that is where God is literally getting involved. And you have to couple that with, what James said, is this: you have not because you ask not. That there's that factor that's involved, and you say, okay, but I am asking. Okay, well, you have not because you ask amiss, so that you may consume it upon your lusts. In other words, you're trying to rub the lamp, and get the genie to grant your wish. And God isn't a genie that He grants wishes. So just in that alone, if you look at just those three things that I said, talking about those that are disadvantaged, advantaged, but also it's just passive as opposed to the active, you can see where a lot of the confusion is on this. The problem is we really don't know when God is actually actively working and when He's not. And that's the problem.
Okay.
And so it's a misunderstanding to think that just because things are not happening the way that you think they should be happening, that God's not working, or that God doesn't want to work. It could very well be just we're on a different frequency. Mm-hmm. And so to answer the question, who does God act with, is those who are on the right frequency. And so that's, which is the next question. What is the frequency? How do you get on the right frequency?
Yeah, we'll get there. Okay, so there's a we went on we went to our vacation. We were out for a couple almost a couple weeks, and we went to a place in Kentucky called we were in Indiana, but we went to this place called the Ark Experience, where they literally built like a portion of a scaled size Noah's Ark. And so for me, going was just it was more like the visual. I wanted to just walk in and feel the visual of
Yeah.
what I've read so many times about in scripture. But they had these like plaques all throughout, had talking about different elements of creation, and the book of Genesis was a very, very big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book of Genesis, they actually mentioned that a plaque about the Tower of Babel. And to be honest with you, I didn't read super far into the stuff they were talking about, but I just started thinking about because I was again, my thoughts were kind of rolling towards what I was going to do for the podcast, and I was thinking about how much they were accomplishing on there. And so they had like these pictures of, it was like considered one of the feats that men have accomplished. And it was, that's what it was. It was they were talking about technology of the ancients. And so they were talking about the pyramids. They were talking about the Stonehenge and those massive stones that today boggles the mind of historians and scientists and engineers. It's like, how did this primitive people accomplish moving these massive stones?
Yeah, it's just hard for us to realize, to recognize when people are industrious because we're so lazy.
Right, yeah.
It's like, that's amazing. No, it's
Well,
not.
it's
Not that it's amazing. It's just that we're lazy.
We just get used. We get used to driving cars with cameras now, so we can't fathom how people backed up without a camera now. It's
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. How can you drive a car
in the
backwards
world?
without a camera? It doesn't make any sense.
How can you drive a car that doesn't drive itself? But it made me think about this idea of the Tower of Babel more specifically from the context of how God saw it. And so the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, I'm not going to go through the whole story, but these men were building a tower. They said, let's build a tower up to heaven. Well, really, I've just basically summarized the entire thing. You know the whole story now. And God looks down and says, he says these words. He says, if they have begun to do this as one people speaking the same language, then nothing they devise will be beyond them.
Yes.
So first question, just straight answer, was God into this tower?
Well, obviously not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he stopped them from building this tower. And it made me think about man's level of accomplishment outside of what God wants. And so God wasn't helping them do this. And I understand God gave them the ability to be able to do this in the first place, right? And you kind of mentioned that in the beginning already. But my question is, how much can man accomplish without God's help?
Well, see, this is something that is my lifelong ambition, and just the meeting we had just before is to help people to understand we can do far more. With God's help, we can do far more because we can do so much without God's help. We are able to do so much without God's help. We can build cities. And that's the actual story of the Bible, is that these are a lot of the cities that were built by wicked men.
Yeah.
And it's not, Cain, is the classic, Cain, he goes out and builds a city, after killing his brother, this wicked guy, being cursed by God. He's never going to come back into the presence of God. He's second only to the devil, in banishment. And,
true.
But he builds a city, and names it after his son, and so it's like, so here he is building a city, naming it after his son. He's got compassion, he's got good attributes, but he's banished. He's never gonna, he because of his evil, the wickedness inside of him. And so we can do a lot, and but with God we can do even more.
So I guess then the follow-up question is, how do you know when God's helping you? So again, you said this in the beginning, there's all the abilities we have. whether we're doing them for God or with
Yeah.
God or without God, God gave them to us. And so I understand the Bible says God's the one that gave us the ability to obtain
Yeah.
wealth. And so
Yeah.
you can't necessarily say God's helping you just because you have money.
Right.
Right. And so, but
Yeah.
talking about this difference between passive and active help
Yeah.
is important, because how do you know when what you're doing is actually something God's assisting in? And I use assist only from the standpoint of what the word help means in that scripture.
Well, I don't think. Well, the answer to the question is you never know, 100%. You might think that he is, but you never know for a fact whether God's helping you or not. And that's that's probably the best thing for us to think, when it comes to this idea. Because the danger is that if you think God is helping you, you can join the dark side and think that he's helping you in spite of your dark side. And that, I'm sinning, but God's still helping me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure God's helping you? Or is it not just that life happens to be just the pendulum is swung in your favor right now? And it may just swing right back. That's the interesting thing about serving God, is that the Bible says we see through a glass darkly. We're like people who need glasses and are not wearing them. We think we got it all right, and it seems to be working okay, so it must be okay. And that can work, but don't know for sure, because we don't have glasses to put on. there's no correcting it. It's just something that I know in my own life that I have learned. There's been lots of times where God has moved and things have happened, and I know God's been involved in things, but more often than not. So I would say that probably when God is helping you is usually after the fact. If you have any inkling that God's helping you at all, it's usually after the fact.
Okay, so now we're getting into some interesting depth to the issue, because there are a bunch of scriptures rolling through my mind when we were talking about this and stories that because you talk about after the fact, but I'm thinking about stories like David at Ziklag is a scripture I've been recently thinking about. David is camped at a place called Ziklag. Him and his men are out, fighting, doing something else, and an enemy comes and literally takes everything and everyone. They kidnap everybody. They raid the city and take everybody. Take David's wives. They take the men's wives, children, the older men, older people that were there. They took everybody, and David comes back. Now he's facing this mess. Yeah. Everything's gone, and now his men are talking about killing him, and so there's this massive problem. And David goes and prays and says, "Shall I pursue them?"
Yeah.
And God says, "Pursue them, and you will, for you will overtake them and recover all." Yeah. And so before he even went there, he knew God was going to help him. And then the end result was a confirmation of that. They ended up recovering everything. Yeah. Now but
think about how it all played out. See, this is the sort of children's Sunday school thing that I'm referring to, is you've leaped ahead, that the idea that because David knew that God was going to help him, he just went out with this full confidence and then just found the enemy and killed him. And that's all there was to it, because he had such confidence. But that's not the story. The story is nothing like that. The story is they happen to come across a servant who's been left sick to die. And, if David had said, we don't have time to bother with this guy, we need to go find them, he would have went right by God's help.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing to understand, is that God's help is God's way, and so that help didn't look like God. It looked like something else. It looked like a guy who was left behind, and the only reason that guy helped them was because David said, take care of him, feed him, give him water. And he treated him kindly. And that's the reason why that guy said, you know what, I'll help you. Here's, my master's left me for dead, and you're helping me. Screw him. you know. But you know, he could have been left behind, which was the way of things. You know, you're sick. There's nothing we can do about you. Leave him behind. We can't do anything about it. Sorry, bro. The see you in Valhalla or whatever. And so yeah, okay, yeah, I'm gonna die. I was with them. We did the raid. My life is over. Oh well, they've left me aside, but I'm still loyal to my cause. You know, all that could have still been at play, and probably was more than likely still in play, because back then servants were loyal to their masters. It was, you know, if you weren't loyal to your master, you'd get killed. And so you know, loyalty is not something that is, you know, take it or leave it. Loyalty is something that is ingrained in you, and David's the enemy, you know. And so, but because he treated him kindly, that's the thing that made the difference. And you know, I know some of this is could be considered, you know, speculative, but if you think about it, it's not speculative, because surely the behavior of David too, if he was like, oh, you little, Amalekite scum, you know, tell me where your master is, you know, and treated him harshly, you know, probably would have had a hard time getting information out of him, and wouldn't have been able to find them. You know, but the main point in that is the understanding that that was God's method. You know, but God's method was not without interaction, and that's a very critical element, that issue of interaction, and that's basically what James is saying. You have not because you ask not, interaction, or you ask amiss, interaction, bad interaction, but interaction. And so there's always that element involved. And had David not interacted, you know, with God's plan, then he wouldn't have found him. Mm-hmm. You know, this is, I'm just thinking if I want to even go down this road, but it's, you know, the whole thing about predestination stumbles all over this, because that's the idea. God told David he would recover all. Did God tell David he would recover all because God was going to do everything to turn the universe in order for David to be able to find them? And so even if David made all the wrong decisions, would God just keep reversing everything so those decisions were good? Or, which is the core of my belief system, is it because God knows the end from the beginning? He knows and is telling David what's going to happen because of the choices that he's going to make. Because God already knows the choices that he's going to make, but David didn't. And like I said, that's the core of my belief system. And so the idea of David having confidence that God was just going to do it, you know, and if God is a predestination God, then he probably would have, you know, just run off, and you know, that would have been the case. But having said that, more than likely, I don't think God would have even answered, to be honest, because it's the wrong kind of character. Because it takes for granted that God's just going to help you because he says he's going to help you, and that you don't have any responsibility to be involved, which a lot of people do today. You know, there's a lot of people that, oh no, I'm going to heaven, I'm saved, and I know Jesus has saved me and everything, but they're not living for God. They're not interested in living for God. They're not interested in being righteous or holy or pure or any of those kinds of things. They just live on that, you know, promise that, you know, well, you know, God saved me, and so he's stuck with me. You know, and that, you know, we're going to find out whether that's true or not when we go to the other side. I don't think it is.
So when you're thinking about people in the Bible, like, help me understand what the Bible means when it says, you know, and he found favor in the sight of God, or God gave him favor. And there's this,
yeah.
you know, this word. It just sounds like I know what the word means. The word just means grace or acceptance, and it's or pleasure.
Yeah.
And so, but it's, you know, it says something, doesn't it? You know what I mean?
Well, okay. Our problem is this issue of time, and that's the problem, because everybody finds favor in other people's sight. Everybody does. That's how things work. If you're a scum, then you probably don't find much favor. But if you're kind, and you have a good personality and have morals and character, then you're probably going to find a lot of favor with people. People are going to want to help you. They're going to want to do things for you. Something I was thinking about the other day as I was thinking about, my daughter. My daughter's been raised by me, but my daughter is far more liberal than I am. Far more. And they have had all kinds of favor, over the years. Not just, in Indiana, but all the time. They've just had favor. They've had more favor in the Tucson church than I have had. And I was there for 30 years, 10 years. I was there for 10 years, and they were there. I don't even know how many. Maybe they've marked 10. Maybe not. I don't know, but it's because they're a blessing, and people want to be a blessing to them. Because they're a blessing, and because like I said, they're liberal. They do things. They give, and it's cool. It's cool to see that, to see that favor. But it's favor based on character. And so why is that any different when somebody finds favor with God? Why is it any different? Because it's the same criteria. He's not just going, you please me, so therefore I'm going to do great things for you. There's reasons why.
Right. Okay, so let's go into some of that reasoning. Because that's really what this podcast is all about. From the very, very beginning, thinking about this issue of God's help and assistance. I mean, it seems to me that when you read the stories, anyway, there's a lot of people in the Bible that it says they found favor in the sight of God.
Yeah.
You all the way up to Jesus. Here is my son in whom I am well pleased. You know what I mean? Hear him. And there's just tons of connections between how people's lives went, things that happened. Even when Joseph is another great example. Joseph, you could say, didn't have all the advantages in life, yet found favor with God in everywhere he was, from Potiphar's house, which is, technically he was a servant, forced servant in Potiphar's house. He found favor in Potiphar's house. He was in prison, and he found favor with the guards in the prison, and became the head prisoner.
But we know why.
But that's my point.
Yeah,
Let's highlight what it was about these specific men.
We know why he found favor. He found favor because of the kind of person that he was.
Yeah.
He was, he did the work. He was a servant to Potiphar, and he was a good servant. He wasn't just a reluctant servant. He wasn't just doing his job because he's not from a slave class. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. Is basically child trafficked. That's probably the way, if the Bible was written today, the way it would be described, is he was child trafficked, but yet he obeyed. He did well. And when that trafficking violated God, God still helped him. He still, that's the whole idea of finding favor with God. So he's in a bad situation, but God made that situation not so bad because of his character. And that's
Is that not something you could accomplish without God's help?
What, character?
No, I mean, so let's just remove God from the equation in that whole situation. Joseph is a kid who his brothers didn't like, sell him into slavery, and he just he's got that kind of personality. He was kind, he liked serving, and Potiphar liked him because of that, and was like, this kid's, got more going on than a typical servant. Let's give him some more responsibility. He finds promotion, he finds, raises, pay raises, all that stuff. And isn't that something you could accomplish without God?
Yeah.
And so what is it that sets Joseph's scenario apart when it comes to this issue of God giving him favor? Like, how is that different than somebody who's just a good guy?
Because the issue was he was obviously still in touch with God. He wasn't, he's interpreting dreams.
Yeah.
So, if that's like a thing that people can just do, then
so there's something
I'm kind of out of proofs that he had a heart towards God, not just people.
No, I think that the connection's well made. I'm just talking about from the standpoint of like what separates him from the standpoint of God's favor What makes him unique as compared to somebody who's in the same scenario and just has
Because he
the
kept
same-
his heart right during the difficulties.
I'm not saying why God gave him favor. I'm saying what's the difference between God's favor and simply, working hard to get in good positions.
Those two things are not related to each other. Yeah, no, they're not related to each other. If you mean his advancements and positions and things like that, no, that's not what favor is. When the Bible talks about him having favor, it's the so, like, for example, he's a prisoner. He's put in a good part of the prison because he has good character and because he is a righteous individual.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more than just simply being a kind person. You have to it would be like saying, well, what if somebody had brothers that hated him and sold him into slavery, and because he was just a kind-hearted person, he was okay with being sold into slavery, and then when his wife made a pass at him and he said no, because he's a moral person, and then he's thrown in prison for it, and he said, you know what, still, I'm just going to hang in there. I'm just going to do everything the right way because I know you just need to be right like that. And then he becomes the overseer of the prison. And then he has a couple of guys who he just is able to interpret dreams for, which is, because he's a nice guy and kind. You see what I'm saying is that you just can't separate those two things from each other. What was the promotions and the things that were happening to Joseph were not ordinary promotions. They were not ordinary things that just happen to people when you're kind, and that's the important element in this. Is that was where the favor came in. The favor came in that he could interpret dreams. The favor came in that God gave him the wisdom to be able to run a prison. In case it gets lost, he wasn't a former prison guard who happened to be arrested. He was a former child who happened to be arrested, and then he's in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's house, I don't think he sent him to guard school, while he was there. And but he's able to run a prison. Right. And so that's the favor. The favor is the fact that he's able to do the things that he's being promoted to. And then he's promoted to second over all of Egypt. Why? Even here's this king, who recognizes, even though he doesn't follow the God of Israel, he says, the Spirit of God is on this man. Look at him, look at his wisdom. He knows how to do things. Yeah. That's all. That's what favor. That's the favor of God, not the fact that he's in a prison and gets a job in the prison, or is Potiphar's slave. It's not those kinds of things. It's the more nuanced, more the thing itself. How it plays out.
So, would you say it's God's favor was taking Joseph beyond his own capabilities, his own natural capabilities, or is this?
Yeah, I mean absolutely. I mean, absolutely. That is what the favor of God is being able to do that. It's funny to me, because that's the Christian experience, and it's been my experience since I was first saved. Is I would be put in, I would get these opportunities for things I was not qualified for. Other than the fact that I had submitted myself to God and the basics of Christianity, that I was going to have morals, that I wasn't going to just, live life the way that I wanted to live, that I was going to be focused on God's purposes and seeing God glorified with my life. That those are the things that as I did that, it was, God depositing in me other things. And so, I've said it before, because there's gifting, there's gifting. There's gifting that's natural gifting, like people who can play guitars and instruments, or art or whatever, so you have your that's your passive giftings, natural giftings. But then you have the active gifting, which is God being able to do in you something, that you weren't trained to do, but you're able to do it.
Okay, so now in the area we live in, this may not apply everywhere, but in the area we live in, well, I don't know, really. I think the United States is probably, everybody can relate on one level or another, but I mean, you can accomplish quite a bit. You know what I mean? If you're a driven person, you're ambitious, you have, drive, you're willing to learn, you're willing to apply yourself to things, put it, like you were saying earlier, put in the work, and you can do things. But what, from the standpoint of, anybody listening to this podcast, no matter where they're at, from the standpoint of like, here's what I can do on my own.
Yeah.
Right. And the truth is, maybe that's satisfying enough. I'm happy where I'm at. I'm fine where I'm at. What's the, what is the appeal to God's help, really?
Wherever you are, and that this is the thing that I was, we had a outreach Friday, and people take turns sharing their testimonies, and there was one testimony of somebody who had just recently been saved, and they said, I believe that I could do anything if I put my mind to it, but after being saved, I realized that I was wrong. And so when you think about that, you think about that, why after, why not before, and so and that's the thing is because when you're putting your mind to things and you're doing things, you don't think about the things that you can't do, even if you put your mind to it, because you stop doing those things. It's not working, forget it, blow it off. And you don't think about it. You just write it off as a loss. And so this is every person in the world. Every person has a deposits and withdrawals, or a can and can't piles. But the can't piles are things that we just that's for us, that's just trash. We just throw that away. And so when you're not a Christian and you're looking at your life, you're looking at the things that you've done, those are valuables. And then the things that you couldn't do, that's trash. And so, like, if you have a failed marriage, well, that's just garbage, it just didn't work, because we don't think of it from the standpoint, which is, as a Christian, you can make any marriage work. If two people are Christians, then it will work. If they're genuine Christians, it will work, regardless of how terrible their marriage was before they became Christians. If they both become Christians, they can make that marriage work. And see, but that's not, when you don't have God in your life, that's not a reality. It's, I'm trying, they have different ideas than I do. We're incompatible. Personality conflict, whatever you want to call it, and it's not fixable. And so it's trash. And it's not because, well, I could put my mind to this and I could work really, 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 really hard, but it'd just be a lot of years and a lot of time, and it may not work, and so I don't want to waste the time, so forget it. So it becomes trash. And so it's not something that you put your mind to do and didn't do it. It's something that you decided not to put your mind to do and didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And so, but that trash can gets really big, but that trash can's not in our sight, because the bigger can is the can of our accomplishments. And so that always eclipses the trash can of our lives. But when you get saved and when you come into a relationship with God, you realize, technically, not realistically, but technically, I could have lived without a trash can at all, with God's help. If I would have put these things in God's hands, things could have gone a completely different direction. And so that's a very critical factor, a critical thing to understand, is it's not it's not what you can achieve with or without God. It's what God can achieve through you that you cannot achieve without God. And so that's the important thing to understand, is that the benefit of God's favor and God's hand upon your life and God helping you is the ability to be able to do more than you could ever do on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And that is only understood looking backwards. You have to get saved, live for God, surrender to Him, and then begin to reap the benefits of that. Like for my life, and this is just the way that my life worked. I would get a job. I've shared it before. Get a car. Get a girlfriend. Lose my girlfriend for whatever reason. Fight. I didn't like her anymore. Got rid of her. Whatever. Crash my car. Lose my job. And it was a cycle. It was a regular cycle in my life from probably 17 to 21 when I became a Christian. For that 4-year period of time, it was a regular occurrence. It's something that happened. I would say the cycle could be anywhere from 6 months to a year. But at the time, I didn't notice that as a cycle. I only noticed it as a cycle because I got saved, because I was at the bottom of one of those cycles. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have a job. Well, I had a job, but it wasn't a great job, and I didn't have a car. And so I got saved on the downhill part of that cycle, and then I got a job, and I got a car, and it was like, whether it was God reminding me of my cycle or revealing the cycle to me or whatever, I had realized, because then it was a thing of, okay, because I had a job, I had a car, and I had a motorcycle, and I had a girlfriend, and it was like, okay, now what? Because that was an ordinary part of my life, but for me, losing the car, losing the job, losing the girlfriend, those were all garbage can experiences. They just went in the garbage can, and so I didn't pay attention to them, because it was like, okay, yeah, but that's another, put that in the garbage. Next time it'll be a better car, better job, better girlfriend, and that was always the case. It was always the idea, the theology of my thinking, was always, I'll just get a better car, better job, better, and for the most part, it would kind of go like that. It wasn't, leaps and bounds, but little minor increments. I would always, I would get a better job, the job that I lost, I would get a better one, usually, because I was desperate to get a job and I had a skill set. And so, but my point in that is that, so I hit that point of that, and it was like, okay, and then I didn't lose my job. I didn't lose my car. I didn't lose my girlfriend. I got a raise and got a better job. And then I married my girlfriend, and I could afford better cars, and actually bought my first new car, after I gotten saved, and we were married for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. Almost, it was still used, but it only had 4,000 miles on it. The guy bought it using a CD, realized he didn't want the car anymore, and so I bought it, because he wanted his money back from the CD. And so, and then it just continued like that. My life just continued like that. Not that there weren't glitches, there were glitches, but those glitches were just small. I mean, compared to that, I wasn't always starting over again. I wasn't always going back to the bottom, come back up, back to the bottom, come back up, there was always a progression. I wasn't in this cycle. And this is the thing, no matter where you are in life, no matter how successful you are in life, you've probably experienced, you may not have realized it, maybe tonight you'll realize it, you're in a cycle. You can't get past this part. You have ideas and ambitions and things like that, but you get to be 40, 50 years old and you realize you're in a cycle. Your life's in a cycle. And, you may be the CEO of a great company, but you've been the CEO of 5 great companies. It's still a cycle. But, there are areas of your life that is like, my relationships are not very good. My marriage is not very good. My influence on my children is very poor. But it's a cycle. It's something you're always trying to work on, these kinds of things, and they just don't seem to be improving and things like that. But God breaks that cycle. whatever it is, no matter where you are, you're at the bottom, you're at the top. It doesn't matter whether you're having a hard time quitting drugs, or you're finding no satisfaction in being yet a CEO of another company. It doesn't matter where you are in that. The experience is the same. You realize I've broken out of the cycle, and that is where salvation at a personal level really shines. And that, like for me, that is what inspires me to want other people to be saved. Because I realize that in this life, breaking the cycle is fantastic. I love my life. I don't. I was thinking about this the other day of just. I love to have these little conversations in my mind, with people who haven't met yet, to be ready for when they ask me questions. But I was thinking about how before I became a Christian, and company parties and getting drunk and all that kind of stuff, they were absences from my life that were fulfilled in those things. And so it doesn't have to be horrible, dark secrets, dark evil things, but just things in life that were things that I did, like drinking, going out to clubs and things like that, they were filling a need in my life. And now I don't need them anymore. And I was thinking particularly about the idea of drugs, and I thought about the idea of quitting drugs and not doing drugs at all. Any drugs, it doesn't matter what it is. Even, I'm even careful how much caffeine I drink. I don't drink multiple energy drinks in a day. But the difference is that those things met needs in my life, but now those needs are met in God Himself. The needs are met, so I don't need those things. I'm not missing things in my life. There's nothing missing. There's nothing I'm craving for. There's nothing I'm looking to achieve, because I've achieved them. It's not that I've just learned how to live with nothing in life. I've achieved those things, and there are more things that I want to achieve with my life, but I've already achieved all those other things. All the things that I was spending most of my time trying to achieve, they're taken care of already. And so I have plenty of time to move forward and to go beyond.
Okay, so you said a lot there, but it seems like that it's important to kind of define this maybe as a last question, is how do you get saved, and what does that really mean?
Oh, yeah. So interesting question. How do you get saved? So. Well, I would say the first thing is to recognize that God is trying to save you. I think that is a kind of your first move. God's been doing and working in all of our lives to try to bring us to a place to where we will come to Him. And because the Bible says that nobody gets saved unless the Father draws him, and so there's a drawing that's already taking place, and recognizing that, and the way that you recognize it is some of the things. That's why I talk about these kinds of things, like the cycle and needs being met in my life and things like that, because those are the things that when you discover them, or they reveal themselves to you, that's when you can actually understand, hey, God's trying to get my attention here, and that's definitely a requirement. It has to start there, is recognizing God's trying to get your attention. It's funny, in altar calls, I'm praying, giving people an opportunity in an altar call, give people the opportunity to become a Christian. And it's interesting to me how many people actually fight with becoming a Christian. They fight with it, and they just don't surrender. And I remember that moment so clearly in my life. It was like I knew that God was stirring me to come to Him. And I thought, I can't, there were negative elements in my thinking, but the negative elements were more about, I don't think I can do this, not that I didn't want to. Not that I didn't want to try. It's just I thought I'm there's no way I can do this. That was kind of the thinking. There's no way I can do that. And so that's number one, is to recognize that you're being drawn. Number two is that you have to realize, which is what I realized that night, was I can't do this. That's the whole point. I can't do it. That's why I'm not here. That's why I'm not one of these people, is because I can't do this. And it took that moment of God drawing me to bring me to a place to where I realized, you know what, I'm going to need, if this is real, if God is real, I'm going to need something, and it's funny because I understood this intuitively. It wasn't, and I, being from a non-religious family, there's nothing intuitive about coming to God and asking God to help you, but there is clearly, and everybody knows that when you come to God, you ask him for help. I don't care where you are. I don't care what your belief system is. You at least understand the principle, that if you're going to come to God, it's because you need help, and so that has to, that acknowledgement that needing help is natural. Everybody needs help. The only people that don't need help are people that are too prideful to admit that they need help. Otherwise, everybody needs help.
So that actually is what getting saved is getting God's help.
Well,
Really?
yeah.
Yeah,
In
that's-
essence, it's asking for God's help.
Okay.
In essence, that's where it begins. It is the asking for God's help, and so you start a relationship with God on the right footing. You have to be on the right footing because you can't come to God with wants or needs or demands, requests, those kinds of things, because it's not. You're starting on the wrong foot, because this isn't about what you want. This is about what he wants. And when you understand that it's about what he wants, and that's the reason why you're caught in cycles, why you have these emptinesses in your life, why you have to do certain things to fulfill your life. It's funny that I was talking to somebody who's made the decision to put God aside and just be a moral person, and talk to them, and they were surprised. I wasn't, but they were surprised that when they made that decision, their biggest concern was that they would have to go on the defensive to against temptations. That they would have to defend against temptations because, okay, yeah, no, God's help isn't there, and so I'm going to have to, be careful who I hang around. I'm going to have to be careful not to let people draw me into drinking and stuff like that. And he said to me, you know what the interesting thing is he says, nobody does that to me, but I do that to other people. The very thing that he was afraid would happen to him, he became. And it was like, how did that happen? And it's something that a lot of people don't understand. They just don't understand how much God is helping us already, and how much we need even more of his help. And so you don't know that till you come to him, and then you learn it in a bad way by turning away from him, how much you really did need him. And so it's his help is clear. It's absolutely clear. When you have somebody whose attitude is, I'm going to be a moral, upright person, I'm just going to do it without God. And I remember I was at the University of Arizona talking to a guy, and this guy was very adamant. He didn't need God. He could be a moral person and this and that. And he was mocking everything that we were doing, talking about how great his life was and stuff. And then one day, it just happened to be the right timing, is he comes out and he is violently angry. And it's quite clear something happened in his life, because he wasn't like this. He used to be all mocking and joking. And from an intellectual standpoint, you guys are all stupid. You don't know anything. But he loved to talk. He loved to talk about the things of God, because he loved shredding, the conversation and being irreverent and saying horrible things that he knew that would, irritate Christians and stuff like that. But this one day, I mean, literally, I went up to him and he goes, "I don't want to talk to you today. Get away from me." And I was like, "Oh, this guy's very different." And then somebody else, "Hey," because he was one of the, he was one of the main antagonizers, and so everybody knew him. So went up to go talk to him, and he punched this guy, and he said, "Get away from me! I don't want to talk to any of you. I'm sick of you all." And it was like, he's had his come to Jesus moment. He's had some moment of reality that your life isn't as great as you think it is. And now he's mad. He's angry at God because he's been mocking him all this time, and now all of a sudden, and it's like, you you just can't. And it's not. I don't want to leave it on the wrong note. It's not God punishing him. It was God leaving him. God saying, "Okay, you think you can do this on your own? Here's life, on your terms." And then life took a swing at him, and he didn't like it. He wants God to protect him. Well, he mocks him, and so, but that's not how it worked. And that's what we're talking about. That's the issue of salvation, is understanding that you need God. I mean, it's as simple as that. You need him. You cannot live life without him and be fully successful. That doesn't mean you won't make money. That doesn't mean you can't be the CEO of 5 different companies. It doesn't mean any of those things. What it means is you will never experience the feeling of being successful, because no matter what you do, it's never enough. There's always more. There's always the skeletons in the closet that you have to hide, because you can't beat them. You can't defeat your own demons. You just try to pretend you don't have any. So that's the secret, is you have to, okay, all right, I'm done fighting this. I need Jesus. I need God to come into my life.
Very cool. Very good. All right. That's it for tonight. It's 8 o'clock. We appreciate you joining and watching if you're watching after the fact. And it's not live. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this, especially all the way through. If you've gotten to this point, hopefully it's been helpful. And we, no pun intended, but we will be here again next week, and we invite you to join us. And in between now and next Tuesday, our church is an active church. We have live services in person you can come and be a part of, and so we encourage you to take time and come check out a service. We'll put some information on the screen here in a moment, but otherwise, we hope you can join us again next week. Have a good night.